You're listening to an encore presentation of this program, KCAA, the Inland Talk Express.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, and Dr. Akil Bashir. This week, like every week, we'll be discussing critical issues that are affecting our communities. This week, we'll be talking about several topics. By the way, if you want to chime in, you can give us a call at 909-792-5222. Is that right, Rosa?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. And so we're going to talk about a few issues. One, of course, we're going to discuss the issue with the voting, with the upcoming elections, midterm elections. We're going to also talk about an issue regarding is there a concerted effort to destroy the legacy and empowerment of powerful African Americans? And last but not least, we're going to be talking about is the last 2 years a sign of a failing or falling nation? And what does the China giving $60 billion to the African nations really indicate? So I'm going to start out with talking about the issue of the upcoming election, the issue of voting, especially as it relates to African Americans and other minorities, and what impact is that going to have on not just the criminal justice system, obviously, but many other issues. And so I think I'm going to begin by talking about the two different, what is the counter issue with regards to voting? Of course, we realized that the last time, or the last national election, that we had a very low turnout. There wasn't, and which, I guess caused the ultimate nomination or for, what's his name? What's the president's name? President Trump, to get into office. And so right now it's really critical because, obviously individuals are very, very concerned about his policies and the fact that he has, the majority of the Senate as well as the Congress, and he's basically, just going, run shot at this point. And obviously, are people really concerned about it? So obviously voting is really important, and obviously, the Get Out to Vote campaign is very important, as we know, for many of us who actually can relate back to a time where obviously we were not allowed to vote, and a lot of the people, a lot of the struggles just to get that right, and now we're here, and obviously there's a lot of individuals who aren't exercising that right, which is of big concern. So obviously there are individuals who are so extremely concerned about the policies that we have at this point, and that we need to actually get more individuals who are more representative of the communities to get into office and do, represent our interests, both the African American minorities and other people in general. But also I want to talk a little bit about the counter argument and kind of, address the fact that I don't want to just preach all the entire show about why we should get out and vote. I want to actually address the counter argument of why voting isn't really productive and why the political process really isn't anything that's going to result in any real true benefits to African Americans or any other minorities, regardless of who's actually in power. I believe that there's a lot of people that believe that regardless of who's in office and who's in power, that the political process has time after time after time again has failed the African American community and failed the minority community. So why is it such a mash dash to get out and vote and try to change those things? And one of the things that come to my mind when we talk about the issues of our political process, our government, and the things that they're doing is that they're really not doing anything new. Everything that we're experiencing, this isn't the worst of it, but at the same time, we've always been ignored and always, fallen short one way or the other, regardless of who's actually in office. And regardless of people even argued the fact that even when we had a black president, that really didn't result in too many changes for African Americans. So you have those individuals that are really critical of the political process and talking about voting and talking about what's going to be in the best interest of African Americans and other minorities aren't necessarily the same thing. So we're going to talk about a few things because I think that, people need to listen to the show, because I think that we've known that as we're talking about things every week, there's always something that ends up the very next day actually coming to fruition. So basically, the Justice Watch crew always gives you the real deal. And so, my thing is that when we're talking about, and, I always remember something my grandfather always told me, Doc, is that as a little kid, I was an individual who always asked questions. I always asked questions as a kid. I always wanted to know why things were the way that they were. I mean, that was kind of the kid that I was. And my grandfather used to, I used to say, Granddaddy, why do they do this and why do they do that? And he used to always say, son, ducks quack and fish swim. That's what they do, right? So don't ask me about it. Figure out what you're going to do about it, because that's what they do.
That's right.
Until you see a dog meow or a cat bark, then you come holler at me. But until that point in time, that's kind of the way things work. And so, what we're seeing, and I think this is the reason why we need to begin to start understanding where we're going, because I don't really believe this is really an issue of us really saving minorities and African Americans. I think this is really what we're seeing over the past 2 years is, are we going to save a nation, right? So I think that although they believe in their minds that actually they're taking their country back, and that basically they're, these are times that we're really facing the biggest issues, that's not really what's going on, right? We're missing the big picture of really what's happening in this country. And what happens is that when you begin to start losing ground, and what you're seeing, that's exactly what you're seeing. When we were talking the other day about, now you're going to start seeing these mass shootings, now you're going to start seeing a lot more hate crimes, these things are coming about, and you're seeing the deterioration of us being the moral leader of the world. One of the things that I noticed is that when President Trump called the African nations, or at least made reference to African nations as the SH, T whole countries, right? After that, you saw where China said they're going to give Africa $60 billion, right? Now, game recognizes game, right? The scramble for Africa is an extremely significant time period in American history. Everybody's always scrambled for Africa's resources, right? And the European powers in the during the earlier part of this century, or the latter part actually of last century, during the Berlin Conference, actually divvied up the Africa, and for power and positioning themselves. And I think that what you're finding is that you have countries like China who's realizing that we're losing this footing. Once you lose the moral high ground in the world, diplomacy is really important, right? And now what they're recognizing is that you have a nation that is constantly losing the confidence of the people who have been the most loyal to them. Right? What I always remember, you remember in Scarface when Tony killed Manny, right? He killed his right-hand man. So as a gangster, you never kill there's nothing more important when you're a gangster than loyalty. And you never kill the people who are the most loyal to you, because ultimately you're going to fall. So what we've seen is we're living in a nation that has never really recognized that the people that are the most loyal to America has always been African American people, even to its own fault. Even when they realized that I went to Europe to fight this war, and now I'm actually being treated worse than actually the prisoners of war. I'm still riding with you. I'm going to be loyal to you, right? The same thing works. It's the same. It never changes. So what we're doing is, I think that we ultimately have, felt like that we're going to create something that's never existed before, right? World powers are like drug empires, right? Every drug kingpin always believes that he can do it better than anybody else.
Exactly.
He believes that I'm going to be able to create this empire, and basically I'm not going to end up in jail and I'm not going to end up in a graveyard. But that never works. It always fails. Empires is the same way. Empires do not fall from foreign invasion. Empires fall from internal conflict. And now what we've done is we've created this internal conflict within our nation that has created this situation where we've made ourselves vulnerable, right? I mean, more vulnerable than any kind of attack that any foreign nation could ever impose upon us. And so now you have other leaders who, you know, they want to be the new gangster, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that we truly understand that we're in a situation where all these things that we enjoy in life is going to come to an end just simply because we never recognize, you know, the fact that as an empire there's certain things that you don't do. You know what I mean? There's rules of the game, there's rules of engagement, there's rules of things that you don't do. If you know, you don't learn, you learn from other individuals, you learn from other empires, right? So my fear for America isn't necessarily that we're concerned about, and obviously I'm concerned about African Americans, I'm concerned about minorities, but we also have to understand we have to be concerned about the fact that we are an empire that's falling, right? And we do not realize what we're getting ourselves into. So while we're involved in all this internal conflict, you have a nation who we're indebted to, who, you know, it's no surprise, nobody gives somebody $60 billion just because they like you. There's game behind that. The game behind the whole idea that let's go here, you're scrambling for Africa. We've given Africa $14 billion. They're giving them $60 billion. And there is concern within the ranks of our nation that if China is to get a good foothold in the African nations, that's going to create a problem. They're talking about building infrastructure there. They're talking about helping the government there. They're talking about doing all these things in Africa. So why are you interested in it? Because they understand how valuable that is. They understand how valuable diplomacy is, right? And we're losing that. And so unless we change things in Washington, D.C., and you're listening to Justice Watch and you're listening to the Justice Watch crew, if we don't change things in Washington, you can be as nationalist as you want to. You can hate whoever you want to, but it's not really going to do much for you if you're going to be the next refugee, right? You're going to find yourself in a situation that other individuals are in. Don't think, what makes you think that you're immune to things that everybody else in the world isn't immune to, right? If you're hungry and you're starving and you losing everything that you have, nationalism is going to be on the back burner. You're not going to be worried about that. You're going to be worried about not making America great again. You're going to be thinking about your own existence. And we're falling down to that situation. So my point is, if you want to talk, as far as getting out to vote, if you're not motivated to get out and vote because of you're concerned about what this president is doing and what it is meant for African Americans or what it is meant for other minorities, you need to be concerned about what it means about the entire humanity of this country. Because if we don't begin to start changing some things, I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not really scared about what they're going to do to me as an African American. I'm not worried about it. I mean, we've come through slavery. So what you gonna do to me, right? You ain't gonna do nothing to me, right? And the people that the ones that are really the ones that are barking the most don't have nothing, right? Most of us have more than most of those individuals who are supporting the president, right? So that's not really the issue, and that's not really the issue as far as African Americans are concerned. I mean, they've been doing the same thing for 400 years, right? Ducks quack, fish swim, right? But ultimately, you're getting ready to head towards what all other nations have gone through that actually ultimately failed. And if we don't begin to start changing that situation by voting and changing the way that we're rolling in this nation, we're getting ready to lose our footing, and we're going to have a bigger problem than race, right? So, you know, I want to get your take on that, Doc, as far as the issue of the voting process and what we really have at stake.
Well, you said so much that you're spot on so many things. When you talk about, first of all, let's talk about the vote. No, before we go to the vote, look, every empire has came into in existence for a certain amount of time. We have had no empire since the inception of this earth that has stood and is standing alone. The concept of an empire is to create a better nexus for that society and then to leave a foundation for those that are going to supersede it to build upon that foundation. Mm-hmm. We have not done that. This is a young empire. The inception of America, we are probably the youngest empire as we look back at the history of empires, that there is in existence today. When we talk about voting, what does voting do? Voting creates politicians. Politicians create policies. Policies create laws and rules which dictate the governance of a given people in a given area. Marginalized communities come from the fact that laws have been made. What can we talk about? We can talk about gerrymandering. We can talk about today the concept of regentification. We can talk about redlining. All of these things came about through policies, that were enforced by politicians. So the self-interest to vote is to create the laws and rules that are going to best serve you as a given people. And when you don't do that, what happens is you are going to be sidelined with the policies that others that have voted want to see in place. I think you said one word that can sum up the essence of this, Brother Ali, and you said it so well. Let's look at white supremacy that basically controlled this country from the inception. It wasn't the fact that white supremacy was something that was just instituted for the sake of. White supremacy created power, okay? And people, when you look at the system today, when you look at the voting system, what politicians are trying to do is hold on to their fundamental power to be able to dictate what goes on in a given region with a given people and for their own self-interest. So when we look at what creates that power base, unfortunately, whether you want to vote or not, voting is essential in this country because voting is the process which creates the power base, which creates the laws at the end of the day, which govern this country. Right. So we have to move on in that voting scenario. And then when we look at the history of voting, the fact that that's one of the massive tools that created suppression, et cetera, the inability for us to create that basis of equality, we have to look back and say, and I think your point was well taken, nationalism and any other type of ism, if you don't have power at the end of the day, you will not be able to not only maintain, but to advance those psychological or those points of methodology, So that with said, I think what we see in this country, to sum everything up, is we see not only a wanting to grab on to existing power, but want to go back and try to reinforce that old power that created that ability for those individuals who were in power to control the dynamics of what was going on. When you talk about Make America Great Again, we're talking about going back to a power-based structure that basically suppressed, oppressed, and kept a given group of people in control while I benefited off of what they were bringing to the table.
Yeah. I think this what's interesting when you talk about the issue of the history of our country and you talk about slavery, for example. And I think that people, one of the classes when I was in undergraduate, I was an African Studies major at Tennessee State. And I remember that we spoke quite a bit about the issue of slavery and talked about the issue of where, it comes from the word Slav. Right, which is the Eastern Europeans, and basically the fact that they were basically enslaved by the Moors, for a significant period of time, right? So it's not a new game, right? No. So everybody thinks everything is new, but it's not a new game. You had your time period, and you might go back there if you keep playing these types of games, right? So I think that basically the worst thing that can ever happen to an individual is to become too comfortable. You know what I mean? And I think that basically what has happened in our nation is that we've become way too comfortable, or they've become extremely comfortable. And in a way, we know that basically a lot of the power structure maybe, understand the game. And they're kind of like, you see this mad dash. I think a lot of it obviously is fear. So there's a significant amount of fear going on around the nation, especially those of the so-called powerful and the so-called elite, as to really what's happening and what's going on and what's happening with our president. And I think that what they're seeing is that basically, once, Barack Obama, President Obama was able to garner 2 elections, nationwide elections, which was completely unthought of and unheard of. And this, I'm going to say this real quick. I remember when I told that this is something I said a long, long time ago. I don't want to give myself a pat on the back because I was raised to be humble, but you know what? I told you so. And when I tell you, usually we're right? Mm-hmm. Now, a long time ago, I said this issue about Trump. When he came out and he says that he became the front runner when he said 2 things. I'm going to build a wall, and I'm going to make it so that people who are born in the United States and the parents are not citizens, they will not be citizens of this country. We know that he's trying to do an executive order at this time to make that happening. So this is all really an idea of seeing the demographics of the country changing in a way that basically changes all of that. I mean, so there's this inherent fear of annihilation, right? So when you have this inherent fear of being annihilated and not necessarily existing, you're running on defense. So in other words, the whole idea, we don't think like that. Most of us were not geared to think that way. We're thinking that as you're creating these policies, as we're thinking about the world, we're thinking about humanity, we're thinking about humanity in general, right? They're thinking oftentimes about just existing, right? And so when you have that kind of attitude and that's the way you really operate, then it creates this level of fear that that we can't necessarily comprehend. And when you can't understand that or comprehend that type of ideology, then it becomes really, really, really difficult to try to understand and to try to get involved in any kind of policies that would have any impact on the nation in general. So we're doing this mash dash, and they're in survival mode, and we're just basically in the mode of trying to create a society that is just. So we're kind of we're kind of in a way operating on 2 different modes. But as far as Bilal, the whole idea of the voting that's going to be coming up, I guess most of us are going to be voting. When is it, Rosa?
November 6th.
November the 6th. I didn't do early voting. I got to go vote. Yeah. But I mean, what is your take on this whole issue of voting and what we have at stake?
Well, I used to have this opinion about voting that it never did anything for us. That used to be my opinion, and I think some people still do believe that. However, I think the climate has changed along with the president and a lot of stuff that he has, perpetuated and put out. I think that a lot of people will come out and vote. But I believe that there's a segment of individuals that won't vote because they used to believe, as I believe, that it did anything. But the thing about it is, I think what they have to realize is that once you do vote and put people into power, you have to make them live up to whatever expectations they put out in order to get in office. You got to put the fire up under them, and you have to stay up under them and make them live up to whatever it was that they put out to get into the office in the first place. And I think a lot of times that we have a tendency to fall back. We don't push them politicians that we put in office and make them live up to whatever it was that they said in the first place. And so therefore, a lot of people sit back and they believe that it does nothing to them because they never lit the fire up under the politicians they put in office in the first place. And so I believe that this climate has changed. I believe that there will be a lot of people that will come out and vote. But just like the doc said, the politicians is the ones who create the laws, so forth and so on, for the marginalized community. We need those laws to favor us, in order for us to get anything. But the thing about it is, we're not going to get nowhere if you don't go out and you don't vote. If we continue to have that mentality that we're not going to get anything, like I said, we have to make these politicians live up to their word.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, the thing about you know, and that's the key. Is obviously once individuals get into office, then, you know, oftentimes we see, if we see any progress, we see very slow progress. So people don't really have a very strong reliance or, you know, a strong belief in the political process. They believe that basically you get someone in office, and basically, you know, you're basically dealing with the same type of conditions. The politicians basically get up there, they lie and tell you whatever they want you to do in order to get in office. You've also seen this whole idea now of that's what happened with Donald Trump in many ways, is that individuals were so fed up with the way that your traditional politicians were doing things that they were voting for Bernie Sanders, and that in many ways may have hurt the possibility for Hillary to get into office, just simply because they, you know, after the 8 years of Clinton, they just seen this as like an extension of just more politics. And granted that there was a lot of things that happened during the Clinton administration that was not favorable for African Americans, especially with the way that we were being put in the, you know, incarcerated as African Americans, that people, you know, they said, man, we needed somebody different, and it always backfires because it obviously takes away from, you know, one of the a candidate that may be more viable and likely to get into office, you know, as others. To the whole issue of your generation, and when I say your generation, what do you consider yourself, the millennial? I mean, in the voting process at this time, I mean, how do you feel about the climate at this point?
Well, I feel like with regards to millennials, I can't help but see how a lot of them are disillusioned, you know? When we think about the millennials, they are all between the ages of 5 and 20 when the 9/11 terrorist attack happened, you know? A lot of them weren't old enough to really understand the historical impact that this would have on our country. They also grew up in the shadow of the Afghanistan war and Iraq war. So they saw how kind of like the government really reacted to these issues. And they were 12 through 27 during the 2008 election, where we saw the force of youth come together to back up, you know, the first African-American president. And I feel like beyond politics, a lot of us kind of grew up in this economic recession. We were entering the workforce with an economic recession. And through it all today, you know, we have a healthcare crisis. We have a student debt crisis. We have a homelessness crisis. We have a healthcare crisis. And I feel like throughout history, you're able to see that the government is able to provide the basic necessities for a lot of people, you know. And this generation grew up very disillusioned. And, you know, you mentioned Bernie Sanders. I feel like a lot of youth were out there, you know, canvassing and doing whatever they could to participate in this campaign. And they saw the Democratic Party fail them once again with, you know, the primary election and how they failed him. So I feel like a lot of the millennials are disillusioned with how things have turned out in our country. But as a millennial myself, I feel like there is importance in voting because I grew up in a minority community, and I saw how voting for the right person in local politics made a difference with them declaring our city as being a sanctuary city. You know, I didn't have to worry about immigration services going through our local grocery store because they had declared a sanctuary city. So now that I think of, you know, the elections coming through and us voting November 6th, I think it's really important to really kind of bring it back home and how it hits home, because if we go out to vote, our vote matters. Our voices matter, and we should think about the homeless man down the street. We should think about those undocumented individuals who are not able to vote when we go and cast our vote. And we should think about those that come after us, because, you know, we're young now and we're still in the workforce, and things can still be changed. And when you talk about China and South Africa, you know, there's this BRICS coalition. It's not only them two, it's Brazil, Russia, India. You know, they make 40% of the world's population, almost, you know, almost a quarter of its output. And they're coming together. They actually had a 3-day summit in Johannesburg, where they kind of came to seek reform in the United Nations, the UN Security Council, and the International Monetary Fund, to be able to kind of ask the members to comply with World Trade Organization rules. And they talked about the US, and you see that there's so many countries out there awakening and not be afraid of the IMF anymore. And that should say a lot, you know, that should say that it's true. The US is is no longer going to be world power.
No, I mean, and that's interesting that you talk about the UN and even the International Criminal Court, where the United States is actually not a signatory to either of those organizations, and trying to isolate itself from the rest of the world. Yeah. And I think that while we're still, kind of involved in this whole, war within ourselves, the world's going to begin to start progressing, and then we're basically going to be behind it. You see what I mean? And it's just, that absolutely makes no sense, and people aren't really real. And now we're even becoming more isolated, where we're talking about we want to limit immigration, we want to limit people coming to the country. And so what some of these other countries, I mean, what they're doing is they're looking for the best and the brightest around the world. And I noticed that one of the things that one of the experts was talking about is they were talking about that the African population of individuals under the age of 30 and the type of talent that you're going to get out of that, and a lot of the money that they're giving them it also involves the issue of education. So I mean, when you start talking about building a global economy, when you start talking about building a global community, we're going to find ourselves isolated from the rest of the world. And if we do that, then basically I don't care how many nukes you have, and I don't care what you're building. We knew, Doc, during the Cold War, you remember how scared we were of the Soviet Union? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that was a superpower.
Hide under tables and.
I mean, we really thought. I remember, that's when I went in the military during the Cold War. And overnight, this was a power that just was no more. I mean, literally overnight, they fell. There was no invasion. There was nothing. They just basically fell. So, I think that's one of the things that, that we have to look at. I know that yourself, Doc, I know that you actually go to the UN, and I know that we go to the International Criminal Court and both see these nations working together and trying to progress and trying to move, and the U.S. is no longer really at the table as the leader. They don't even really want to be involved. So.
Well, remember when this whole started, and Rosa brought some good points. Look, I've been to Africa numerous times, and the Asian population has been in Africa for the last 15, 20 years, putting roots in the ground. But the way they came into Africa was based on relationship, was based on partnership. They didn't come in to try to dominate. They came in, and you alluded to it, Brother Ali, to help build infrastructure while they were trying to seek their roots into the ground and create relationships. You look at what's going on worldwide, you see a shifting of the power base throughout the world. This is what I feel America is truly afraid of. It started with the euro and the move for the euro. That's another conversation for another day. But that economic regenerator, is what's pushed this whole program. Look, let's look at this from a war concept. When you are on the defense, you are in a state of emotionalism. When you're in a state of emotionalism, you think with fear. When you're on the offense, you're in a state of progression, and then you become more strategic because you control the narrative. So the concept of the use of fear to control the people and to create the ability to move the people is much more easier than if we were in offense and those people were on offense, because if the people are on offense, they have strategy. Going back to voting, look, at the end of the day, what are politicians afraid of? They're afraid of their constituents not being in agreement with the direction they're going to take. So we can bring this all the way back to the community in terms of community unification. If the community is unified, the politician is supposed to speak to and for the community, and those laws that are induced are supposed to be for the betterment of the community. So we have an onus to be unified in our thinking process, in our voting process. We should be having strategic meetings where we're talking about the politicians, not as politicians, but what would they bring to the table in terms of the vote to get us the type of rules that are going to get us out of marginalization, that are going to empower our communities, and at the end of the day are going to be better for us as a people. If we had these venues going on across the country and us not keying in on the individual, but keying in on what the individual's bringing, then I think we'll be much more focused in terms of getting what we want and understanding the necessity of the process of voting. I, like Bilal, I didn't vote for many years, and I had to really question myself in the process. I didn't vote because I was disillusioned.
Right.
This is a bull crap policy. That vote doesn't matter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But see, that's what people in power rely on because they are going to control the narrative at the end of the day.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that when we talk about younger people, Bilal, I think is what's really important about younger people is that when we start talking about a global community, and what I hear more and more and more, if there was a way that a lot of individuals in our, and I want you to answer this question for me, Rosa, if there was really a society where other individuals could leave this country and go and live and have health care and have a job and take care of their family and be safe, how many people do you think would just get up and leave this country?
A lot.
A lot. Most
You know what
definitely.
I mean, they would just get, I mean, it's like if I knew that I could just cash in, a lot of people feel that way. I mean, hey, man, if I could just cash in, I could go somewhere else and I could get all these things that I'm not getting in this country, I would go there in a heartbeat,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to ask you, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to get this caller real quick.
Yeah, hey, good evening.
Good evening.
I've been listening to you guys, and I enjoy listening to you guys just as much as I like talking to the youth. But last week I've been putting online and talking to a lot of people about getting out and vote. I got 3 grown sons. Now, I had to really, really, really do a lot of convincing to have them go to the polls with me Tuesday. Now, I understand they play because, see, even when we had, I know, the Democrats trying to get control of Congress. Okay, I'm telling you the truth, Brother Zulu and Bilal and Dr. Bashir and Rosa. I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt this time. I'm really seriously thinking about going independent. But I'm gonna give them because see, when the Democrats had control of Congress, they ain't do nothing for us. And when Barack, people keep telling me all this crap this man did. Okay, they were just happy because we had a black president, but we have to hold people accountable. When we get them in that office, they tell me, oh, he only did what he could do. That ain't good enough. Don't give me that crap. Oh, they'd have killed him. Well, he knew that before he accepted the job and started running. So don't give me that narrative. I just, I'm telling you, man, it took so much for me. So I figured if I can't convince my own sons to go vote, I said, man, do you know how many people died for the right for us to have this right to vote? And just like what Zulu was talking about leaving, my older son and his wife, they've been looking at Ghana and all this, and I say, man, look, please, stay here. Because they talking about buying land, they got all this stuff, you can go here and there. But if your butt falls, you ain't got no cushion. That's why they still staying here. They ain't staying here because we love everything that's happening to us. But when we had Barack, okay, I have nothing against gays. Nothing. My father, he told me that gays was bad luck. So all the way till I was about 28, 29, I wouldn't be around no gays, not on my job, nothing. I'd call in sick. That's the mental thing he did to me he didn't want me to be gay. Okay, so that was one thing. Don't be around him, all this. But look who got the power now. I mean, Barack, when he was in there, he stayed in Hollywood. He was in Hollywood more than JFK was. I'm serious. He was just up there. But if you don't have the money, you don't have the power. And they putting the money behind their narrative, their agenda. So if we got to start really, like when you guys say, what can we do? What can, we need solutions instead of complaining. They got to put the brothers back to work. They got to give them good jobs. If they got to put trade centers in the community for the brothers, and not just have it where it's hard for them to even get in these community centers or training facilities. It's hard. They put a lot of restraints on the young brothers to even get into construction training or plumbing and that. If they don't want to, be Rhodes Scholars. See, that's what we got to push. We got to push stuff like that and hold these fools accountable. We just letting them in there, and then as soon as they get in, they don't do nothing.
Right.
Yeah. They don't do nothing. They go right back. They give us the bare minimum. It's the bare. But when they running, it promises everything. Okay, now, I get into it. I stopped arguing with people about Trump. They act like he waved a wand and this economy is like it is right now. Okay, we're in a relay race, and there's three of us, and I pass it to this guy. He passed. Okay, you crossed the finish line. That don't mean you won the race by yourself. Barack, he did start the economy going, but what they're doing, and they're gonna continue. They're going to do everything they can to hold their spot. Right. Look, they sent bombs to everybody who said anything wrong about Trump. And look at these rallies. Right. You got black people in these rallies. I mean, you got black people arguing. They will argue with you to say Trump is the best thing since sliced bread and jelly.
Right. Yeah.
So we gotta dig our own self. Right. It ain't. They begging them, hey, them days over. That's why these little youngsters, they don't want to listen.
Right.
Yeah. They don't want to listen. They'll listen if you got something to say. But if you don't have nothing to really say, they ain't trying to listen to. They don't want to know about God. Yeah. All that. They just like, tell me something to help me get me a job.
All right. Well, man, I definitely appreciate you giving me a call. You brought on some pretty good points. I always appreciate you calling in. So anyway, there was quite a bit of, I appreciate the brother always calling in. I mean, he definitely brings in some really good issues to the table, especially talking about the whole idea of the fact that we don't really have people that have a lot of faith in, and I'm going to go back to you on that issue, because that is an issue when he talked about trying to get people to the polls. So just chime in a little bit with your thoughts on the fact that people aren't really looking, or people don't really have a lot of faith in the voting system.
I think history, I think if you look back at history, and if you continue to see your people in the same condition that they in year after year, I believe that speaks for itself, why people don't, have faith in the system. And it goes back to like what I was saying before, we don't see a lot of that progress being made due to the fact that we're not holding our politicians accountable. And that's plain and simple, I can just remember something small, and this is something on a small level. I can remember at one point in time when the mayor came along in Compton, they all wanted these people, and one of the things that they continue to say, we're gonna fix the roads, we're gonna fix the road. And year after year, you go into potholes. I hit about 4 or 5 of them going through there and crack my rims. But year after year, these people saying they're gonna put in, come in office and they're gonna fix the roads, but they never fix the road. But that's just something on a small level. So I think that we just have to, as individuals, we have to get out and vote, but we also have to follow up with that vote. We have to follow up and put that pressure on them politicians once they get in office. But also what I wanted to do is speak to what you were saying. This picture is real big. It's bigger than what we typically seeing right now. And the thing about it is, whenever you have an enemy, that enemy always wait for that opening up to pounce on you. Right. And I think right now, what you were saying in terms of that internal strife that you have is what brings down the empire. And I think that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing that internal strife. You see all of the racism, and you see all of the shootings and things like that. We going mad inside of America. Right. And people, and don't believe people are not sitting back watching this. People are sitting back watching this. They sitting back watching the president. They hear every word that he's saying. I heard somebody come across the internet not too long ago. They posted up a picture where a gas station put up on a thing saying, "I'll give you free gas all day long the day that Trump don't say nothing stupid." Right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, man, it's crazy because the simple fact is we're destroying ourselves. Oh yeah. I
mean, there's no doubt about that. I mean, there's this, and so we're just so, and then we have been medicated for so long with some of the things that we have as far as our music, our television, and people and the internet, and people aren't really paying attention. So there's a lot of things going on, which for some period of time, I guess, worked. But I think ultimately we're actually in a situation where, we're kind of seeing, this whole idea of the falling and decline. The one other thing I wanted to talk about is, and this is kind of a question that we got regarding the issue about whether there's a concerted effort to destroy the legacy and empowerment of powerful African Americans, and we'll touch on that just a little bit. And the reason why is that the names that were given to me was Kobe, Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby, Michael Jordan. I mean, like they all come through this whole situation. And basically, when you see someone getting to a level of power or empowerment, there tends to be this concerted effort to make sure that you take them down. I mean, there's this true belief that that they want to put that asterisk beside everybody's name who comes into play, no matter what. And I think that when you begin to start looking at maybe some of the things that have happened in the past with some of our leaders and some of these individuals obviously are just sports figures, or some are entertainers or whatever they may be. But every time that we have somebody that we can, grasp onto, or somebody can look up to, they figure out some way that they can, in some way or another, tear that individual down. So the question is there a concerted effort, Rosa?
I think this election, this presidency, is a concerted effort to kind of tarnish the legacy of Obama.
Right.
That's how I see it. It's a response to that, and I feel like we see it every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a great point. I mean, and everything that he's doing, basically, the two things that he's actually focusing on, immigration and the Obamacare was the first things that he's actually dealt with, and those are really his babies. And the whole idea, I believe, is to destroy the legacy of powerful African Americans. And that's been kind of the whole. I see it over and over and over again. That whenever you get to a certain point, that there are individuals, I believe, that do. And sometimes people say, well, is there really this conspiracy? But I think that you have to understand the whole idea of socialization, right? When people are socialized a certain way, there does not have to be conspiracy among groups of individuals. Socialization is when people tend to move and act in a very common way, and when you have large numbers of individuals who are moving and acting in a common way, they're going to react to certain things a certain way. Right, and so I don't know how you feel about that, Doc. As far as
you don't. Well, I'm in 100% agreement with you. Look, when you don't know where you've been, how can you determine where you're going? When we still have constitutionally the fact that we were equated to 3/5 of a man. What are we talking about here? And it goes back to rules. Now, I wouldn't individualize and say every person that is non-color is trying to lead the charge. But what happens with power when you control power? You usually get what in alignment with power. You get those individuals that have an eliteness, those individuals that have a certain social privilege. And so at the end of the day, even if I'm not in alignment with the power mechanism, I do not want to give up those privileges that I'm given, and sometimes I don't even realize how great those privileges are. And when you look at people being maligned, etc., it's very hard for me to control and stand upon your back and oppress you if you understand the level of your greatness, which comes from where you've been and the foundation that has been laid by those that have superseded you.
Yeah.
So I want to take it back real quick, Ali, to the fact that it's system driven, and this is what we got to understand. These components are system driven processes that are doing this damage.
Right. Well, I think that when you look at the issue where you have I mean, there's certain types of like, for example, there's been entire communities that are thriving that they went in and they destroyed.
Yes.
There's been any time that you see a situation, and so you know, Rosewood. There was another one they called the Black Wall Street.
Right.
Yes.
You know, all these. You know, so you have that was not an accident. You're not talking about something that's just made up. You're talking about thriving communities, and as soon as you see a thriving community, then there's going to be this whole endeavor to make a concerted government effort. So there's only a few communities where the government has been involved in necessarily tearing down the entire community in an effort to do so. Those are not things that people are making up in their mind. Those are things. None of these things are by accident.
Yeah, but you know, it reminded me of something you said a while back that really kind of like made things resonate in my head. You said, "We're the champs."
Right.
You know what you want to do? You want to take the champ down.
Right.
And so anything that is put forward to make another champ come along doing this line, you know, to resurrect more and more champs, you want to try to cut it down. So I'm gonna cut down Kobe and I'm gonna say rape. I'm gonna cut down Tiger Woods and say he did this. I'm gonna cut down Jackson and say he did this to Cosby and say he did, because all these little youngsters that's looking up, this is the only sense of what they have as a positive black male role model. And when they can look at that and they can grow from that and prosper from that, then that means that later on in the future, they're gonna be people that are living up to these expectations. But if I cut them down short, they're gonna look at them and they're gonna lose hope.
Yeah.
But Bilal, we can't give them the opportunity either, which we do sometimes by not having what Brother Ali talks about, that discipline. I got a quick question for you, Ali. I know you want to go somewhere. No, go ahead where you're going to go. I'll go out there. No, go ahead.
No, what I was just going to kind of get to is that basically, so this is the kind of the way that we live as in a society. Human beings make mistakes. Period.
Yeah.
There's nobody that can live through this world that can make. If you give me the opportunity and the resources, I can get anything on anybody, because you're going to make a mistake.
Right. Most definitely.
So if you take that and you take individuals who, I mean, look at the President of the United States, right? I have not done nowhere near the things that the President of the United States have done when it comes to morality. And I'm not saying I'm the most moral person in the world, but I can tell you, you know, I don't say some of the things that he said, do some of the things that he does. I haven't done any of those things, right? So this guy's the President of the United States.
Yeah.
There's people in prison that's done the things that he's done, right? What if Barack Obama said, "I'm not going to show you my income tax return forms," right?
Yeah.
What they probably, you know what I mean?
Wesley
They would say that he's violated. They would figure out some kind of code that he's violated,
Yeah.
right? If they had those individual women who came out and said that he done these things inappropriately to them,
yes.
do you think that he could have gone through that? No. So the reality of it is that, you know, it's kind of like pick and choose. It's like don't do as I do as I say. So the reality of it is that you can, you know, when you talk about Kobe and his indiscretions, when you talk about, you know, Michael Jackson, he was found not guilty, right? But yet and still he's living his life as being someone who is basically, when you talk about Bill Cosby, you know, I one way or the other, whether you look at it, I'm not saying that anything that any of these individuals did that was right. I can say that I know a lot of dudes that were walking around in the 1970s with, you know, they were wearing necklaces with cocaine in it. You know what I'm saying? They were giving women Spanish flies. I'm not saying that basically what Bill Cosby did was right or wrong, but I'm telling you that he's not on this island by himself. And there's a lot of other individuals that have basically done the same thing that he basically did. And you know, again, you know, sometimes even we are harder on ourselves than they are, because we have to understand that as human beings, you basically are going to make those mistakes. The problem is that you're put in a position where one person can do one thing, right? I don't know of anything that I ever did that put me in a situation where there's somebody else that, let me just say, for example, as an attorney, right? As a black attorney, there are things that white attorneys can do in court that and get away with it. I can't. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And so, you know, and that goes for any other profession. There are things that, for example, like you have even black doctors may be held to a higher standard, and then you have black people say, you know.
Right. But see, I'm in total agreement with you. But if we look at the art of war, the first thing the art of war teaches you to understand the dynamics of your adversary, and then prepare for that. We know how they're going to come at us. They have been since we've been here. And when we don't prepare real quick, we put that opportunity. I know we got a minute left, but the question I wanted to ask you, when we talk about processing, isn't gentrification creating the same dynamic to where we have lost control, to where our communities are being ravaged now? Another process, and I just wanted your opinion on that.
Oh, absolutely. The gentrification, definitely, and we need to probably talk about that next week, too. but yeah, that's definitely one of those things, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, how much?
2 minutes.
Okay, no. I don't think so.
No.
Yeah. But at any rate,
58.
but anyway, man, I wanna thank our caller for calling in this week, like every week. I mean, he's definitely somebody that definitely his input was significant and definitely helped us in our conversation. And I'm going to encourage everybody to go out and make sure that you vote. No matter how you feel about it, get out there and do something about it. There's too many people that gave their lives for that.
Exactly.
But at any rate, so thank you for tuning in this week. And on behalf of the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Cart, and Dr. Kil Bashir, thank you for tuning in. And until next week, we'll see you at the same time, same place, same channel. And until that time, stay blessed.